Hi, today I want to talk to you about seasons. A lot of my friends in recent days have heard me talking about a variety of seasons. We look in the natural. Even today I look outside and I'm watching spring starting to move into what was once winter here in New England. But what I see happening is that with the ending of winter, there's changes that come. There's a springtime that wants to come, and there's a winter that still wants to hold on. And when we look at things in the natural, we identify with the natural seasons, if you will, of life. We look at winter as a time of dormancy. We look at trees and we look at flowers and there's nothing. And we look at the darkness and the gloominess, so to speak, and we wonder what can come out of this. And I know, because I live in New England, many of my friends are skiers and snowboarders, and they love outside sports, snowmobiling and ice skating and all those things. And I absolutely love those things. But the season itself has a power behind it. And we're going to talk about that power in a moment, because really what I want to do is just describe the natural seasons for a moment. New England has its own variety of springtime. It perhaps comes later than other places in the country, but when it comes in, it comes in. You still have, sometimes you have winter storms that are still trying to rock us in the middle of April. And we have summertime, springtime that's coming in such a way. But at some point, all of a sudden, we realize that the trees now have a green glow to them. The leaves haven't fully formed, but it seems like there's maybe a rain or a slight snow or something, and then a warm day. And all of a sudden there's a blossoming, a budding, and it turns everything, it develops that very fresh greenness. And what we look at is we wait, and the flowers begin to come up, and crocuses come up, and we see flowers pushing through, and green growth pushing through that we've not noticed before, because while it's been there, it hasn't been visible to us. And then we come into summertime in where we live in New England, and I'm sure it's different in other places, and I know it's different. But summertime here, things begin to heat up, and it becomes this time of excitement, and people begin to book all sorts of things. Because of living in New England, it's funny, as winter starts to taper off, people begin to book events, whether they be church events or town events or carnivals or all that kind of thing. By the time we hit summer, everything's in full tilt. And we go through that time, and then we start to watch, and we start to see things die off. We see plants that were there a couple days ago with beautiful flowers, and they're dying off. And we come into that beautiful season, at least for New Englanders, where the trees are painted with oranges and reds and purples, and they're just magnificent. Blue skies with white clouds in the backdrop, and beautiful pictures come out of this area. And then we return once again to that winter season, where the first storms come in and the shortening of the days. And what we notice is, we notice things starting to die off, and we notice that, I can only call it a gloominess for lack of any better term. We begin to see things just change. And what I've noticed in people is people understand that there are seasons in their lives. As Christians, sometimes we look at things and we think life is just always going to be on the up and up. And I believe there's a value to that. I believe there's a revelatory process that we go through. There's a learning process that we go through. There's an understanding process that we go through. There's a solidifying of our being and our relationship with Jesus. But there's also seasons where things change. There's seasons in the natural, even as we look at, a young couple will decide to get married, and then after their marriage, that not too long after that, they'll have a child, and they'll watch that child grow up, and they'll be all enthralled with that. And then as that child gets older and begins to express its independence, his or her independence, what it does, it begins to move away from the parents. And the parents begin to see the handwriting on the walls that one day this child is going to want to be on their own and develop their own relationship, and begin to participate in their own marriage with their own spouse and develop children. And so we look at that and we say, well, those are seasons of life. But there are other seasons that happen in God. And I want to just talk about that for a moment, because I think we don't want to realize that. We'll start with the winter, because it's what we're coming out of. There's a purpose for winter seasons in our life. Those seasons are so that we can get in touch with ourselves. In New England, in our winter season, what happens is trees shut down, and the production of saps and things that bring forth life on the trees, that all shuts down. But there's still a process, and what that process does, it causes the tree to get larger in its girth. and it prepares it, and it gets it ready for new branches to come forth. And when that sun finally hits it, it begins to bring forth that wonderful green glow that I talked about in the natural. And our life's like that. There's a season in our lives, a winter season, so to speak, where God is packing us full of His goodness. We're shut off from things, and we're isolated, and we're concerned because, hey, life's not moving fast enough. I'm watching my friend Joe, and he's doing great and mighty things for God. He's headed to the mission fields of Tanzania or to places in Russia and all those things, and I'm sitting here at home and I'm reading my Bible, and it's really cool because I get to hang out with God. But what's going on, God? What is going on? And I know a lot of people lately that have been in that season. They've been the product of their environment, even in the natural. Perhaps they've lost a job, or they've come out of school, and things have changed and things have shifted. But what they're really experiencing right now is God solidifying things in their core being. Because when they begin to blossom and come forth, what they're going to realize is how much is in there that they weren't aware was in there. The tree that puts forth branches and puts forth buds on its tree and brings forth the new and shiny leaves isn't aware of what's in there until it's in the process. And we move into that springtime, and life begins to come forth, even what I described as the struggle, that struggle of greenness coming forth, that blossoming, that blooming forth. That happens in the supernatural as well. There's things that we learn, and we grab hold of them. We grab hold of the revelations, and they begin to come forth. And what we're faced with is, wow, everything's new and everything's beautiful, and I don't know what to do with it. And while it was winter, our days were shorter and our times were shorter in the daylight of God. But what we're seeing now as we move into this spring season is the lengthening of days. And in that lengthening of days, there comes forth this urgency almost. And we know that it shouldn't be urgency because there is a rest for those who are in Him. There's a time where we recognize that we've entered into that rest. And urgency does not exist for us who recognize the rest. Jesus said to the church, even when He spoke, He said, "Come unto me, all ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He was talking to the church. He wasn't talking to the unbeliever. He was reaching out to the church and saying, hey, you've been caught up in all this stuff. And so we enter into that springtime, and we want to do fresh and exciting and new things. And revelation that we had during the winter, all of a sudden we see how to make it work. And then we come into that season where everything's very, very exciting, almost what we would call a spiritual summertime, where everything's bright and everything's shiny and everything's warm and everything's just coming to fruition, and we see lots of exciting things. We see the connecting of relationships. We see the connections of our revelations and all those things that God has put into us. And then we come into our foliage season or our fall season, and we come to that harvest time, and we see things that we've participated in. Some of those things are coming to an end. And we look at that, and there's a beauty to that. There's that brightness to it. We know it's on its way out, so to speak, but we know there's a brightness because we know there's a new season. And my encouragement to each and every one of you who's watching is simply to say this: whatever season of life you're in, whether it's winter, spring, summer, or fall, I encourage you to embrace it, to grab hold of it and say, God, what is it that I'm getting out of this winter? What am I getting out of spring or summer or fall? What is it that I'm going to see? Because God is ultimately responsible for our harvest. We don't see, in New England, we don't see apple trees straining and going, oh, I want to produce an apple. We don't see peach trees working hard to produce. That's a fruit that God gives. And I think when we learn to embrace seasons, even when it seems like nothing's moving, what we do is we get to see the fruit and the harvest. So my encouragement to you today is to grab onto the season of life that you're in, whatever that may be, and enjoy whatever that is, with the knowledge that it's going to change, because there are seasons of grace. And we watch those come and go, and throughout all of that time and all those rhythms that we see of the natural, we see them occur even in the supernatural. Thanks. God bless you today.